Today on The State of Us, married couples are 4 times as wealthy as their unmarried counterparts. Welcome to The State of Us. I'm your host, Justin T. Weller, joined today by the one and only, our senior resident historian here at True Chat, and of course, the friendly redneck liberal himself, Mr. Lance Jackson. Today, we're looking at why moving in together doesn't match the financial benefits of marriage. This is an article from the Wall Street Journal. There's a lot of data here to break down. In other words, if two people, right, are cohabitating together, whether it's romantic or
if
otherwise.
They're cohabitating, are they together?
Yes.
Okay. I don't know if that was like a chart or a graph, but to me, if they're cohabitating, they are together.
Well, I guess what I mean is like the distinction of, when people say you're together versus like you have a roommate kind of thing.
But if they're cohabitating, they are together.
Yes.
That's redundant. You don't need to say cohabitating together.
Yes. If they are,
can you cohabitate apart?
If they are romantically intertwined,
but
and
romance doesn't have anything to do with finances.
Well,
right? That's what the article,
right?
One of the major points it makes is that
there are obviously lots of people who live together who aren't necessarily romantically involved. But when we talk about counterparts to married couples, for the most part, what the article is looking at are people who are, quote unquote, in a relationship together, as in usually romantically, who have chosen to live together, who have been living together long term. But are not married. So why, if everything's the same, quote unquote, except for marriage.
Now, to be fair, this is also age range.
Yes.
Because it would make sense that if my daughters got married, they wouldn't be as wealthy as I am because I've been married longer, been earning top dollar longer, all those other things, right?
Right. Age for age.
So age,
yeah.
it's age comparison.
Yeah.
It's not fair to compare,
right.
Different
you
age.
and your married wife who have been together.
Be 40 years in a month.
Okay, way too long. Versus.
Way too long. I will tell her you said that.
I'm just saying what you've told me. I don't want to get in trouble with the boss. I'm just quoting.
No. If you're quoting me, I said 50 years.
Okay.
I said
We're
I would stay 50 years.
I got confused.
10 more
okay,
years.
10 more.
Then I didn't say I'd leave her. I would just live in sin because I didn't get to before.
Okay.
We never lived together.
So you do the cohabitating without the marriage bit.
Right.
Which is reverse.
Right.
Most people do that and then they get married. You're gonna back
together,
into it. Okay.
Nothing. We were young and dumb, got married, and then came together, and it's like, oh, this is what this is all about. We thought it was a sleepover with benefits. We didn't realize there was a lot of stuff going on there that we didn't have a clue about. So now after I said I go 50 years, and then I'm gonna live with her in sin and see if that's any better. Then I can write a book and report on it.
I did it backwards, and I want to know how it works.
I want to know, did I miss out on anything, or did we do it the right way? I will write a book. Stay tuned, people. In 11 years, it'll be on the bookshelves.
So the point is, though, to Lance's point, this is comparing apples to apples in terms of couples within a certain age range. As of 2019, the median net worth for cohabitating couples ages 25 to 34 was $17,372. A quarter that of the $68,210 for married couples of the same age range, according to data from the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. For singles, it was $7,341. So what you've got here, Lance, right? Let's take them from smallest to biggest. Single, 25 to 34-year-olds, median net worth of $7,341. For 25 to 34-year-olds who were a cohabitating couple, right? Not married, but were a couple that lived together, $17,372. And for ages 25 to 34, married living together, $68,210.
Married? Okay.
Yes.
But before you run out and get married, folks.
So Lance, the key is just get married, right?
No,
and then everything
No.
is fixed. It's just, and it doesn't really even matter to who, just, find anyone, just get married.
Just get married.
Just get married. Yep.
Unfortunately, that's not the way it works. It's not the marriage is not the
4 times
magic.
Net worth overnight. That's what happens?
No,
is that how it works?
That's not how that works at all.
There'd be more people getting married, I think, if
because
it worked
if that was the case, the show would be over. And we still have almost 30 minutes to go.
Oh,
so
that's too bad.
That's not the way it is. Okay. And just to be fair and bring up the other side, because Justin's all about getting married.
Am I?
You can do, well, you are married. Really?
That's
well, we can, okay. Brett, I hope you're listening.
Yeah, for the record, it's very important that April and Brett never listen to this particular episode because Lance and I are going to be in a lot of trouble.
So anyway,
our net worth is going to go down substantially.
You're in trouble because you said I've been married way too long. You're in trouble on both counts.
I misquoted you. I thought it was 40 years was your benchmark. I forgot that it was 50.
I'm still sitting on high ground. I'm still good. But it's not marriage that's the key. It's what you do with your financials.
The mindset of marriage.
Right.
How does that change things?
Because you could do some silly things with your money while you're married that wouldn't allow you to accumulate wealth as well.
Sure.
So the married part is not the key. The key to today's show, if you listen closely now, is going to be the things that you do when you combine your money with another person, whether you're cohabitating unmarried or cohabitating married.
Because something that's very, I think is very notable, and I'm glad the article brings this up, is that for the past 2 decades, Americans have been moving in together at higher rates, according to the Pew Research Center. So the share of U.S. adults who are currently married steadily declined from close to 60% in the 1990s to under half in 2019, again, according to Pew. Over that same period, the share of adults 18 to 44 who were living with a partner climbed to 59%. So in other words, if we just look at, the total percentage of people who were living together, who were in a relationship and living together, really that's not actually changed drastically. Yeah, I mean, it was, 60% of the vast majority of those people, that was the percentage that was married. There were very few unmarried in the 90s. Now, basically what's happened is you have less that are married. You still have the majority are still married. I guess let's just to be clear. But the difference is that number's decreased while the number who have decided to move in together who are not married has increased. So the thing, I guess, to note there, is that people still are choosing to live together. They're just maybe not choosing to get married. And you might say, well, what's contributing to that? Because the other thing is, and we'll talk about this more in a little bit, is you might be thinking, well, it's the tax breaks, right? I mean, that's married filing jointly. I mean, that pretty much does it, right? No. I mean, yes, that is a benefit, but surprisingly, that's not actually what the research reveals is the main reason that married people have higher net worths.
And not just that, right? But the attitude has totally changed.
Yes.
Towards marriage. And this is from a professor emeritus of sociology at Johns Hopkins, Andrew Cherlin, says, many young couples today approach marriage as a capstone.
Capstone. What do we mean by capstone?
Well, it's, as he goes on and explains, this is a quote, if you build an arch, the cornerstone is the first piece you put in, and the capstone is the last. What this means is people see an economic bar they need to clear before they can get married. So they're putting in all of these pieces in their archway, and then they get married once they've reached these economic goals that they've set for themselves. So I'm an example of marriage as a cornerstone. We got married and then we tried to figure it out. I was still in school. I had 2 years of college in, my wife had 1. We were both working minimum wage jobs. We had no business getting married. Okay. We did have a new car. And that was it. And we lived in an apartment. And from there, we tried to figure it out. And what Professor Cherlin is saying is that for the most part, young couples don't do that now. They get through school, they get the job they want, the good job, they buy their cars, they maybe even buy a house, and then they get married. It's a different way, right? Different approach, but...
Well, as you were saying that, I wrote down something. It's kind of, and again, we don't have the data to support this portion. So this is just Justin editorializing here. Because I'm thinking about, well, what does that data tell us, right? Where before it's kind of, I get married and then I'm going to figure out how to get, like, I may be in the process of still going to college even. I may not even be done with school. So like my education is still continuing. I'm not set up in my career yet necessarily. So it's like there's a lot of growing left to be done individually as well as together where, and again, that goes back to that view of it kind of being the cornerstone versus the capstone, where now what we're seeing, I mean, again, according to the research, is this change in sort of the mindset. And what I wrote down is, they don't want the dependency that traditional marriage brings.
Interesting.
I mean, why do you want to be stable in your career, have a car that's not going to break down? Why do you want those things before you get into a long-term relationship? Well, the data, if you're big on data, says that there's a coin flip chance that relationship's not going to work out.
True.
So I think part of what's happening is millennials, right, and the generation behind us, Gen Z, are starting to see, okay, marriage rates amongst our parents, right? I mean, divorce has become very common, right? It's in fact, it's as common as staying together. So it is very common.
What you meant by a coin flip.
Exactly.
Because it is when you get married, it's a coin flip now, whether or not that marriage will last.
And I think part of the difference there, right, is if you look back to like when Lance and his wife got married, that's not how that was. The statistics said they would make it, right? That they would stay together long term. There was a very good chance that their marriage would not end in divorce.
But not as young as we got married.
No.
That we were against the odds. And just because I know all your minds out there are racing, there were no children involved. There was no pregnancy. We did not. We were married
It wasn't a shotgun wedding.
We got married at 21 and 19 because we just wanted to get married because we thought it would be fun. Children didn't enter the relationship until 6 years later because we had growing, as you mentioned.
You had a lot of things to do.
Keywords you mentioned. There was a lot of growing individually and together and financially that we needed to do.
So I guess the thing that I'm getting at there is I'm wondering, and we want to hear from our listeners too. You can send us an email, podcast@thestateofus.org. Do you think that there's something to that? Is it this feeling of security that they want of like, if my marriage falls apart, my whole life isn't going to fall into shambles?
Exactly, right.
Because again, what the data says is, there's a decent chance that my marriage may not work. Based on.
So I want to make sure that I'm established before I join with somebody else.
Right. Now, again, we don't have the data. That is just pure speculation on my part.
That's a just supposition. Okay.
Yes. But I would like to know what people think, because that's what came to mind as you were explaining. I'm like, it sounds like what they're after is trying to create some stability that means they don't have to rely as much on the marriage. And then why would you, that was the next thing is, of course, well, why would you do that? So we know that the mindset is shifting. So again, though, that brings us back to why are the people that are married, why is their median net worth $68,000 as compared to $17,000 for those who are everything but married? They're living together, they're romantically involved, but they're not married. How is it just tax breaks? Well, like we said before, no, it's not. So what else is it? Keep it here on The State of Us. We'll be right back. The Wall Street Journal article that we're referencing today points out that while there are legal and tax benefits to marriage, research suggests the financial security and long-term mindset of those who tie the knot may also be a powerful driver of wealth. More married couples pool their money, such as sharing savings accounts and investing together, to achieve certain goals. Cohabitating couples are less likely to combine finances and investments. When you're working with two incomes and combining investments to maximize compound interest, that can significantly increase a couple's financial prospects. According to Emily Gerbinski, who's an associate professor of marketing at Cornell University. Married people may be much more likely to have these conversations around what goals they have for their financial future. There seems to be something very special and unique about deciding to share finances. So one of the big things is, because you're thinking about, right, okay, you're cohabitating. So like we have rent, and say rent's $1,000 a month, just hypothetically, right? So that means you're going to pay $500 and I'm going to pay $500. So how is that any different if we're married? Well, you're right. It's not really any different if you're married because you both have your incomes probably, right? I mean, assuming that you're both working. Again, 1 for 1 in this scenario, assuming that you're both working and you're making the same money and you two are married and you're splitting the cost versus you're not. Well, the big difference is that it's not so much on the expense side, is it? It's on the income and long-term financial planning side.
You pay your half of the bills and you're left with $300 a month. Okay, what do you do with it? Do you go buy clothes? Do you travel? Do you, what do you do with it? All right, do you invest it? And your cohabitating partner they have, 3 or 4, let's say they have $300 as well, because you have making the same amount of money. And what do they do with their extra leftover $300? Well, they invest $100 of it and they do this, and they go play golf and go to the movies once a month, and okay, so that's what they do. When you pull that together, now you have 600 and you can each go do something that you want to do, but now maybe you have $400 that you invest as a couple. And now, rate of return, compound interest, what the professor is talking about there, then that happens because when you pool your money, then all of your money, all your finances, you start to make decisions as a couple what to do with that money. Now, you don't need to be married to do that, but what the article points out is more married couples do that than couples that are just cohabitating as an unmarried couple. So therein lies, every extra dollar, every dollar you spend, you talk about, and it can lead you, and then you have the give and take to what are our goals? What is it we want to do? Okay. And like my wife said, she told me because she had this issue with her family, she goes, I don't care what we do, but I want to save money so that we can help our kids get through college. Because my parents couldn't, her parents didn't. So actually, my parents got me 2 years. Her parents got her 1. My parents couldn't help anymore. Her parents wouldn't help. So she said, we struggled to get through college, get our master's degree, get our master's plus so we could make more money in our jobs. I don't want our children to do that. I want to set them up on a stable. So that was our goal, right? We came together and made a goal and we accomplished that. And now we have more, but we made sure that was a goal. We're going to eat this food. We're going to cut these coupons. We're going to, buy this kind of house because our ultimate goal is we want to have a pool of money. So when our children decide to go to college, we can take care of that expense for them now we were lucky both our kids got half scholarships at universities. So we only had to come up with half the money. But again, goals, right? We came together as a couple and said, this is a goal we have. Let's work towards it. And that's where you accumulate wealth, is when you combine that money, instead of you taking your 300 and your partner taking their 300, you put it together and you have 600 and you decide, well, you can go do this once a month and I'm going to do this once a month. And the rest of it, we're going to invest.
I just wanted to give an example based off of the one you had already provided, right? So you've got the 2 people who are cohabitating who split their expenses. Right. And then what's left is theirs to do whatever they want.
They have $300 left.
They have $300 left, right? So let's say that of that $300 left, that you set aside half of it, which is that's
pretty bold.
That's pretty bold. So you're setting aside $150 a month, right?
I said only one of them set aside $100. I said that they, discretionary income was $500. They just flittered away every month.
Yes.
So you're doing better than what in your example, but go ahead.
Yeah. So in 40 years, right, at standard annual compounding interest of 8%, in 40 years, they'd have $469,000. Well, that's a decent, I'll take the money if you don't want it, Lance, but
no, I got it.
So that's good. But what if instead of 150, we take the two people, right? And we keep everything the same. So they each had $300 left at the end of the month, but now they put it together. And now instead of putting aside 150 a month, they're putting aside 300 a month. Okay. So all the expenses,
so
everything else is the same.
So it's the same amount of money.
Right.
But they pooled it.
And realistically, I mean, the other thing here to take into account, folks, is right, they're probably going to end up being able to put more than 300 aside because they're both putting it together
further into their marriage.
Right. But we're not taking that into account. We're just
keep it the same.
Right. We're just keep it simple.
But by putting in 300 a month instead of 150 a month in separate incomes.
Now you're at $940,000.
They doubled their wealth because they put their money together to invest it rather than investing the same amount of money separately.
And I mean, there's no super complicated math there. It's just the basics of, rather than doing it alone, you did it together. And as that wealth accumulates, it lets you do more things, right? It's the same notion with, if that wealth's accumulating, you can probably buy a house sooner, right? Than you can alone. You can probably get that car that you've been wanting sooner than you could alone. And why? Well, because when people go to lend you money, right, they're considering what's your ability to repay. And if there's two of you on the hook for repaying versus one, generally speaking, that makes that institution feel better. Because even if you're a really high earning single individual, you are a greater risk than two people. And part of the reason you're a greater risk is because if you lose your job, there's nobody else here that's going to be
no place for them to go after the remaining amount.
It's you and what you got.
Right.
Now, if you guys have everything together and combined, it's probably not likely that you're both going to lose your job at the exact same time, right? So, I mean, there's a lot of different things that go into those considerations. And that goes back to, it doesn't mean you have to be married because, and this is where I wanted to share the personal example of, my husband and I have been together. We're going on 8 years right now, but we've only been married about 3 of those 8 years. So what about the first 5 years? Well, after about a year of being together, not even actually, it was like 8 months. We didn't have the option of getting married in the state of Ohio. Couldn't do that.
No. So after about 8 months together,
we decided there was going to be a long-term commitment.
Okay. So you made that decision.
Right. We're not going to get legally married, but we're going to say that for all intents and purposes, that's how we're going to view things. And we decided we were going to move in together. So, and part of that was, I mean, we talked about it. It was just like, well, if we're going to move in together and if we're going to conduct this as if we were married, then we're going to we had separate bank accounts, of course, and everything. And we were both still going to school, but we're going to open a new account and we're going to move all of our money into this account. And that's where all of our paychecks and all of our expenses and everything's going to come out of. And we also felt like, because we're living together, that just makes it simple rather than us each like, well, you're going to pay this. It's just, it's all going to get paid out of the same account. It's all going to go into the same account, makes it easy. And so that began, somewhere around 7 years ago and, not quite, but just about 7 years ago. And then, we got married, but basically when we got married, nothing about our financial situation really changed except for the benefits from a tax standpoint of being able to file jointly and take the, married deduction versus the single deduction. But honestly, folks, I mean, our accountant can tell you that didn't make a drastic difference. I mean, did it make a little bit of a difference? Yeah, but it wasn't like this overnight kind of like, oh my gosh, we now have all this money, Really, it was that we had combined our finances. We were paying everything out of the same pot and all of our investing was going into the same pot. It wasn't, well, you have an investment account and I have an investment account, and it was all going to the same place. And likewise, when we started our business, it was, well, we both owned the business. And when we wanted to get a loan from the bank, we were both on the line. And so when we wanted to buy our house, we were both, it just back to all those things we've been talking about. The interesting thing there I want to point out is it was all prefaced though on, if we're going to treat this relationship like we're married, then we should do X, Y, Z. So we didn't even really escape that mindset. The only reason we weren't married is because we couldn't be, but that wasn't like it was, we're going to treat it that way. So then this is a thing you do when you get married, which speaks back to what the article's talking about, that people don't, for whatever reason, right? They view marriage as that's when you take that step. Most people. And what the article is showing us is that may not necessarily be the wisest financial decision to wait for marriage for that to take place. Because who says, I mean, the article is referring to, romantically cohabitating couples. But the romance part has nothing to do with the financial benefit component. So who's to say if you've been living with a roommate for 10 years and you have every intention to keep living with them, doesn't it make sense to do this?
Right. Because on the flip side, just very quickly before we go to break, you could be married and not pool your money and not pool your investments, and you would not see the advantages. That's
Correct.
what we're saying. It's
Exactly.
not being married that does it. It's when you do the financial steps that the article points out, which tend to happen more often when people are married. But it doesn't just don't run out there and get married
It'll all be fixed.
because all of a sudden we're going to have twice as much money. That's not true. You have to take these steps of pooling your resources and paying out of the same amount, out of the same account, and investing to your extra money together. So there's a lot of decisions and a lot of conversations. And I think, Justin, you would agree with that. Lots of conversations with the person you're going to do this with. Whether you're married or unmarried, you have to do a lot of talking and you have to come to some kind of agreement so all the finances are being pushed in the same direction. That's how you reap the biggest benefits.
So what else can you do if you're not going to be married? What are the steps? How could you benefit from some of what the mindset of being married is allowing those who are married to do? Keep it here on The State of Us. We'll be right back. Lance, I was talking to a business partner the other day that I'm invested in a property with here locally, and he had told me, he said, and by the way, folks, just to be clear, this is not my spouse. This is just a business partner. He had said, when you do projects like this, people don't really realize, but it's like a marriage. And he was explaining that, because there's going to be good times, there's going to be bad times, but the reason I bring that up is because in a lot of ways, a marriage, yes, is certainly hopefully for most people, right? It is a emotional commitment, but it's also an economic commitment. And I think that's part of what the article is sort of opening up for us, is there's a very real business relationship that exists as a result of becoming married. It's what Lance was talking about before the break. It's this notion of, well, we're going to combine our finances. Well, what do we want to spend our money on, right? What things are we willing to expend money on? How much do we want to save? How much do we want to invest? Where do we want to go in life? What do we want to have when we retire? All these things that are no longer just you, like in a business, you have to consider the whole picture, right? Because it isn't just what you want, it's also what your partner wants. So I think part of that for folks is saying that, if we think about it a little bit more like, what's the business benefit of it? I also explained before the show when Lance and I were talking about this, that I think something else that helped Brett and I is, we have also technically co-owned, an LLC for many years as well, even before we were married. So we were also benefiting from a lot of the tax breaks that businesses get, which kind of funny, but again, tells you sort of how, from an economic standpoint, how our country looks at marriage. Many of the benefits that you can receive as a result of having a corporation are similar to some of the benefits that you can receive if you get married.
That's the key, is trust. Right. That's the big word.
Oh, huge.
Whether you get married or don't get married, you have to do the financials with somebody you trust.
Yep.
And if you trust one another and can communicate with one another, and if you don't have common goals, work out the common goals, that's when you see the biggest successes.
Yep. It's huge. And I would go so far. I mean, my husband and I do not have a prenuptial agreement or anything like that. I know those are generally frowned upon. Because it's the whole, well, you're planning for things to go wrong. But I think it's also a conversation, if you do trust somebody, about what if someday things don't work? How do we want to handle that? Hopefully that's never the case, but much like, we think about it, contracts in business have severability clauses, right? What happens if this contract quits working? What do we do? And
I think to the point of the article, it says socioeconomic factors play a role in the difference between married and partnered wealth. The higher your income, the likely you are that you will marry.
Mm-hmm.
A 2017 report by the American Enterprise Institute found. Well, if I have already accumulated a couple $100,000 or $300,000 to $400,000 worth of stuff before I get married, I might want a prenuptial.
Right.
Because I don't, but in the case of when you started like you guys did,
when you don't have anything
from the very beginning, and when, excuse my language, I got married, we didn't have a pot to piss in.
Yeah. It doesn't matter as much.
Whatever we have made, we did it together.
Yeah.
Whether I worked extra hours to put her through school or she worked extra hours to put me through school. And I know you and Brett have done many of the same things. Whatever we have is because we worked hard together.
Yeah.
Maybe at different times in our life, we worked harder than the other person.
Sure.
Because the other one was doing this or that.
Yeah. Or worked differently.
But we were both investing all of our physical and emotional well-being into the relationship.
Into the same pot.
Right. Our
paths are intertwined.
Right.
And
so there's no need for a prenuptial because when it comes time, it's half and half, because that's just because it took both of us to get here.
Yeah. Yeah. But that is another point about when you're entering marriage. I think it certainly does, play a role into that. Not that everybody feels the same way about that, but that's just another one of those. This goes back to trust, right? You ought to be able to talk honestly and openly about that kind of stuff. And if you're afraid to talk honestly and openly about that kind of stuff, then that maybe is not the right person.
Well, there's the
to
trust,
do it
right?
with,
if you can't talk to that person about those kinds of things, probably not invest with them.
Yeah, probably not super wise. And that's really not that different. Again, that's not just a romantic thing. That's a business thing too. Having been in some business relationships where the trust was questionable, I would any day of the week take the ones where I trusted the other person or, trusted the person 90 or 95%, like be to the extent that you can trust, any human, like, we all have stuff that people can't fully know about us, I suppose. But what I'm getting at is as much as you trust anybody, right? Those ones were always for me, not only did they end up better financially, but they were also much more pleasant to go through because you have your ups and downs and they don't always go great. But we're going to come out the other side of this. We'll get it figured out, And if it doesn't work, we also trust that this is a good person that I'm working with, somebody that I know.
And both of us did everything we could to make it be successful.
Right.
So nobody leaves with bad feelings.
And nobody's going to try to, again, for lack of better terminology, screw the other person on the way out. They're going to try to be fair and reasonable. Those are all, again, those aren't just, I don't think, romantic relationship things. Those should just be friends or colleagues or professional relationships like that. Hopefully that's something that we all want in all relationships. But that's really the thing, I guess, that I took away from the article was going back to the headline makes you think, that marriage is the key. And really what marriage is it's the mindset. It's that societal thing that we've all built in that's, well, because we're married, now we will combine our finances. And the question is, that's really not necessarily, that's fine, right, to use marriage as that time. But if marriage isn't on your docket, maybe you should explore still getting those benefits with somebody that you do trust, romantic or otherwise, friend, family member, colleague, whatever. If your goal is to never be romantically involved with somebody, because there's certainly people out there who don't want to be, or maybe romantically involved, but they have no intention of living with somebody else or getting married or anything like that. There's lots of options, I guess is kind of the point.
Right. Well, and this is at the end
and don't give up the wealth.
Right.
Holy moly, 68,000, versus 17,000. That's a,
well,
that's I'd
be remiss not to mention this, but as we leave you today, there is a little nugget here. Partnered couples with young children tend to have less wealth than partnered couples without children.
Those darn children.
But
that's
let
what
me
causes
tell
all
you,
the problems.
as my dad told me, he goes, if you wait to have children until you have enough money to have children, you will never have children.
Because you'll never have
what
right. You feel like you need. Yeah.
And as someone who has 2 adult children, they bless you more than any amount of money that you spend on them. But yeah, don't think that you're going to accumulate wealth as quickly if you have children. But if that is what you want, that emotional, I want to say stability, because again, it gives you that common goal to work for. If you're cohabitating or you're married and you have children and your goal is to provide for those children, it's amazing what happens to your decision making and what you then decide is important. Well, it used to be really important that I do this. And you look at that,
all of a sudden,
you look at that little one lying there who's just looking up at you in complete adoration for, and need of diapers and food and survival. Your decision-making process totally changes. And I think for the better. I think it's an item that I would not give up and have gone through. But if you're not ready for that, then think very carefully, because we don't need more children in this world right now who are not taken care of. So make sure you choose wisely and do understand your personal wealth financially will not be the same, but emotionally, if you do it well, you receive back exponentially.
So Lance, why do we have this conversation today? What was the goal?
Well,
we're telling everybody to get married. Go get married. You'll be rich.
That wasn't the goal. No, what we told you is there's ways to be successful.
So getting married is not a get rich quick scheme.
Not at all.
Okay.
Right. And what we're trying to do, as such as our mission here at True Chat, is to educate people, that's you, the listening audience, by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations. And we did that because we trust one another, and we trust you, that as you listen, you know what we're trying to say and the points we're trying to make, and you don't misconstrue that. And it's not to get married. It is that if you combine your finances and invest with someone that you trust, you will have more in the future than if you try to do it by yourself. I think that's what we tried to say, to sum it up.
So you can hear new episodes of The State of Us Tuesdays and Thursdays as a podcast, and you can find us on AM and FM talk radio stations across the country. Lots of ways to listen to the podcast, right, Lance?
Oh, multiple. There's
Spotify. The holidays are coming up.
Spotify,
right?
There's Stitcher, there's Apple Podcasts.
And we need people to tell other people.
You can go right to True Chat and listen to it. That's the way I do.
Okay.
So you're
That's
sitting
the way I do.
You sit
That's how it be done.
You're in the kitchen and you're working around, and everybody's kind of like, there's a lull in the storm. Bam, hit your phone, play that podcast on those speakers that you've got around the kitchen, and all of a sudden the conversation will start. And you might learn all kinds of things about your family. For The State of Us on True Chat, I'm Justin T. Weller. I'm Lance Jackson. Special thanks to producer Bradley Butch. Thank you all, our audience, for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Be the change. Be sure to check out our website, thestateofus.org, for books, articles, and all the ways to tune in. thestateofus.org.